One good text after 2 weeks of silence, and somehow you're right back in it. That is not affection, that is a dose, calculated to be just enough to keep you from leaving. Most people believe breadcrumbing is just someone who's busy, or bad at texting, or genuinely unsure of their feelings. But in advanced behavioral psychology, we know that intermittent, unpredictable effort is not a sign of confusion, it is one of the most powerful reinforcement patterns that exists. Today you are going to learn exactly why breadcrumbing works better than consistency ever could, and the precise method to starve it of the one thing it needs to survive. To understand why this works, you have to understand a concept from behavioral science called variable ratio reinforcement. If a reward arrives every single time you take an action, your brain eventually stops finding it exciting. Consistency is calming, but it is not addictive. If a reward arrives unpredictably, sometimes after one try, sometimes after 20, your brain becomes far more engaged, not less, because it can never be sure which attempt will finally pay off. This is the exact mechanism behind slot machines, and it is the exact mechanism behind the good text that lands after 2 weeks of nothing. Breadcrumbing isn't confusing because the person is complicated. It's addictive because the unpredictability is doing precisely what unpredictability always does to a brain seeking a reward. Here is the specific shape breadcrumbing takes. The crumbs are always just large enough to reactivate hope, and never large enough to constitute an actual relationship. A message after a long silence, a single meaningful compliment dropped into an otherwise empty week. A vague mention of hanging out soon, with no date ever attached to it. Each crumb individually feels like evidence that something real is there. It is only when you zoom out across weeks or months that the pattern becomes visible, minimal input, precisely timed to arrive right as you were about to give up. This precision is not a coincidence, even when it looks like one. A breadcrumber does not need to consciously calculate the exact moment you're about to walk away. Their own attention operates on the same intermittent logic, drifting elsewhere until your presence, or the threat of your absence, becomes noticeable again. The timing feels engineered because, functionally it is, just not necessarily through deliberate planning. It is often simply their own low-investment radar detecting exactly when your engagement is about to drop below the minimum needed to keep you around. Notice what breadcrumbing actually cost you while it's happening. You are not living inside a relationship. You are living inside a waiting room, checking your phone, interpreting silence, feeling a disproportionate high from a single text message that any actually invested person would consider the bare minimum. Your emotional bandwidth stays perpetually reserved for someone who has claimed almost none of it in return. This is the real damage, not the absence of affection, but the presence of just enough hope to keep the waiting room occupied indefinitely. Here is the exact method to starve this pattern, and it works in 2 phases. Phase number 1 is the input audit. Track, honestly and specifically, the actual ratio of their effort to your emotional energy over the last month. Not how it felt in the moment the crumb arrived, but the real numbers, messages sent versus received, plans proposed versus plans that ever became real dates. This audit matters because breadcrumbing survives on the felt experience of a relationship and collapses the moment you measure the actual one. Phase number 2 is the response parity rule. Going forward, match your effort to their average, not to their best moment. If their pattern is 2 weeks of silence followed by one strong message, your response is calm and pleasant, but proportionate, not a full re-engagement that rewards the exact ratio that has been working on you. You are not punishing them. You are simply refusing to supply more investment than the relationship, as it actually exists, has earned. Understand what happens once you apply this consistently. Someone who is genuinely just busy or slow to open up will typically notice the shift and begin closing the gap themselves because their interest was real, just poorly expressed. Someone who was breadcrumbing will often escalate briefly, sensing the hope-reward cycle weakening before the crumbs simply stop altogether, because sustaining you was never the actual goal. Occupying your attention at minimal cost was. The next time a single good message arrives after a long silence and your entire nervous system lights up in response, do not mistake the size of your reaction for the size of their investment. Audit the real ratio, match your effort to their average, and let the waiting room finally close. You hold the psychological matrix now. If you want to keep building your psychological armor and mastering the hidden laws of human behavior, protect your mind by hitting that subscribe button right now. Stay aware, stay safe, and never let them pull your strings.